on to development. So let's start with early brain development. So remember, we need to know 4 basic parts. The brainstem, which is obviously connected to the spinal cord, therefore it has motor and sensory functions, okay, and it also has autonomic functions, so those things that just happen automatically, we don't control, so things like heartbeat, breathing. Then we have the cerebellum. Okay, this is our little brain and it coordinates movement. Then you have the thalamus. Yeah, we don't need to worry too much about the fact that there are 2 parts of it, but your thalamus receives those sensory messages from the eye, sends the signals to the visual area, and then coordinates all those motor signals that you are getting. Right, so remember, if you think back to the multi-store model, when we talked about sensory input, okay, exactly the same thing is happening here. All right, then we go on to the cortex. Okay, remember that this is divided into 2 hemispheres. So this is all our thinking and processing that goes on here. All right, so for example, if we hear a loud bang, it's the thing that makes us jump away, right? Because we are scared, and so therefore our cognition happens, right? So we're thinking again, connecting back sensation into perception. Okay, so your autonomic functions through the brainstem will kick in, but then your cortex is the one that will think, right, wait, why has that happened? What does that mean? So that you understand everything. All right, so we then looked at the idea of the roles of nature and nurture. So remember, nature are things that are inherited, okay, genetically inherited. And nurture are those influences that we have. Right now, that could be me as your teacher, that could be your friends, it could be the environment you grew up in, it could even be things that you eat. Good and bad experiences, right? Even things that happen in your womb count as nurture. They are not inherited, right? So if your mother smokes when you are in the womb, right, then the chances are that your brain growth will be slowed, right? If your mother experiences infection while she is ill, again, this can have all sorts of effects on you, right? Many children have been born with brain damage or with hearing issues or various other things because of an infection that their mother has experienced whilst she was pregnant. Right, next, things like voices. Okay, so speak to your baby, read things to them. I speak to mine in French, doesn't seem to have had much of an effect. Taught them their times tables, used to talk about those things. However, them hearing music certainly did. And also, of course, this fact that when a baby is born, it recognises its mother's voice and follows the sound of them. All right, remember that really it's very difficult to separate nature and nurture. They are both going to be in there. All right, so we then go on to look at Piaces theory. Okay, remember he talks about stages. All right, so as a child gets older, they're developing through these stages as they are moving onwards, and they develop a schema in life, right? So your schema is all the information that you have and how that is all stored. Okay, so we construct different ideas, we put different thoughts together. So within that schema, we will then have assimilation and accommodation, right? So remember, assimilation is things that are similar, right? So if I think that cars are only red and shiny, and then I see a blue car, right, I have to assimilate and change my schema just slightly because it's something similar, but I've added a new experience to my existing schema. However, if I see a bus, I then have to consider, well, wait a minute, there are still things that are similar here, right? But I've got to now accommodate, okay? It's making a different noise. It's a different size. It can hold more people, right? But it's still got an engine and it's got wheels and it's got a steering wheel and a driver, right? So I put that into my existing schema. And I accommodate what I already know, and now I have a schema that is a bus, not just a schema that is a car. All right, so Piaget, we know we have to be careful. You know, we watched the videos of him that he was kind of picked up from a very young age and was doing scientific research and whatever else. Okay, but it's a case of where he actually did his research and whether he was looking at the whole demographics of society. He did do a lot of research though, so that's very important. That's a big positive of what he did. It does have a lot of real world applications, and this then helps because people have taken what he said and they've used it to help them develop ideas in education particularly. All right, so remember he talked about conservation, okay? So this is the idea that we don't just learn more, it's also the way that we think about things. So Piaget wanted to show that younger children find it difficult to understand the idea that quantities do not change. All right, so he was trying to prove that younger people think differently to older people. All right, so this is where we're saying his studies are really useful because it develops further research into that, and that's where we get McGarrigle and Donaldson's Naughty Teddy study. So this is your named study in the specification. Okay, so they want to show if there's no deliberate change, what is a child's reaction. Yep, so they get 80 children, 40 who are at nursery school and 40 who are at primary school, so only really a year's difference in age between them. And then they bring in the Naughty Teddy. They've got their 2 rows of counters, and Teddy jumps out and he messes up the rows, right? So the results were that 41% of the children gave the correct answer, that it was the same number, but 68% gave the right answer if the change was accidental. And for primary children, both figures were higher than for the nursery school children, okay? So this does seem to support the idea that older children think a little more in a little more complex way than younger children do. However, it's not really conclusive in what they are saying. So there is a weakness in this, that they are all from the same primary school. The second is that sometimes they didn't actually notice that any change had taken place. They were distracted by the teddy. And also then obviously the strength is that it does actually it challenges some of Piaget's assumptions, but it also kind of supports them at the same time, okay? So then we go on to egocentrism, okay? So remember, this is the idea that a child only sees things from their own perspective. And this is what Piaget said, that from the age of 7 onwards, then they develop the ability to be able to decentralize their thoughts, and they then start seeing things from other people's viewpoints as well. Okay, so Hughes did the policeman doll study, another named study in the specification. So he said that you might be able to see things from another perspective if it actually made sense to you, that it was something that was normal to you. Because Piaget did it with the mountains, right? And he said, Hugh said, okay, let's try and use something that is more realistic to them. So he then used a policeman doll. And children had to hide from the policeman. I'm a little bit concerned about that, really. So he gets 30 children aged 3.5 to 5 years old. They're all from Edinburgh, which has a high crime rate, so I guess that does kind of work, right? So you have your intersecting walls. Policeman doll is placed on one side, and they have a boy doll, and they're asked to move the doll so that the policeman can't see him. 90% of the children were able to position the boy doll where two policemen could not see him. Okay, and they could do it in quite complex structures as well. So again, it shows that Piaget was underestimating younger children's ability, and particularly if you put things into an everyday context. Okay, so evaluating this, then obviously then this is the idea that it is much more realistic. Again, and that it challenges Piaget, but negatively, there could have been unconscious hints that were coming from the researcher. Okay, so having looked at those different ideas that Piaget has had and have been challenged, we then looked at the stages of cognitive development. Okay, so looking more at this idea of stages. So first we have sensory motor stage, which is 0 to 2 years. Okay, so this is the idea that a baby is just learning from all the things that are around them and things that are waved in front of them. So that's why you have the colourful mobiles over the top of children and in their prams, so they're constantly playing with things, right? However, here we have object permanence, right? So our little boy that we saw with the cucumber and his dad with the coconut shell hiding the cucumber, right? So once it's out of sight, a child doesn't know where it's gone to. That's why they like peekaboo. Then we go into the pre-operational stage, which is 2 to 7 years approximately. So now obviously you're starting to use language, but there's no logical thinking that is going on in the way that this happens. So this is our lack of conservation and egocentrism that we've just talked about. Then from 7 to 11, we go into the concrete operational stage, right? So now children can start conserving, right? They can tell that if you pour water into 2 cups and one is thinner than the other, it's still the same amount of water. It's just that the shape of the cup has changed. And then they can't really think about abstract ideas at this point. But so logical thinking is the thing that they're missing at this stage. So then at 11 plus years, we go into the formal operational stage, right? So this is where we now start to use logical reasoning to be able to move forward. If we can use logical reasoning, then we can use scientific reasoning, and then we can start to appreciate abstract ideas. Okay, so evaluating this, I mean, the two negatives are that he underestimates children's abilities and that he also overestimated children's abilities, right? So he underestimates younger children, but he overestimates older children. However, as a positive, the basic idea is correct, right? But just putting those ages onto the stages makes it very specific and maybe makes it a little too rigid. So Piaget's theories have been put into education, very importantly, all right? So we talked about this idea of readiness, that a child learns when they are ready to learn. So that kind of takes away that rigidity of the stages, that you need to start learning by discovery, that a teacher shouldn't just be teaching, they should be facilitating the learning, helping you to discover things for yourself, that learning has to be far more individual, right? That one size doesn't fit all. Obviously it does fit the majority of people, but it may be that some people need extra support. And then application 2 stages, right? So remember we talked about in sensory motor stage having toys that squeak. In pre-operational, having games where you're dressing up, where you're using plasticine, right, because you're trying to experiment a bit more. And then in concrete operational, that you need to be doing more manipulation, developing your numerical skills. And then formal operational is where you go into that scientific study. All right, so this is very influential. It's had a big influence, particularly on primary education in the UK, and it is possible to improve with practice. So actually Piaget stages don't allow for that idea that a child can be ready, and that readiness can be very quick. So I think I told you that I could already read before I went to school, and then when I went to school we used this system called ITA, so I had to learn that whole new system. I was the second to last child in my class to actually be approved for understanding this ITA system. Once I'd got it, I read all the books in the library that we had, and I was allowed to go straight on to regular reading, which I could do before I got there in any case, and I was the first person in my class to be moved on to doing that. So I don't know why I needed to do that, but anyway, the readiness was there once I'm there. Ruined my spelling as well, had to play Scrabble more. And also, of course, the negative is that traditional methods may be good, right? Rote learning has brought up a lot of people who are exceptionally intelligent people, so it's not all negative. All right, then we go on to Dweck's mindset theory of learning. So remember we talked about fixed and growth mindsets. So if it's fixed, we think that our ability is innate, and no matter how much we practice, we're not going to get any better. But if we've got a growth mindset, we will take failure, work on it, move ourselves forward and develop, and we're doing that on a continuum. Okay, there is lots of research to support this, and then there is a problem with ideas to do with praise, and we'll look at praise a bit more, but it does have a really good real world application. So then praise and self-efficacy come into this idea. So there are lots of positive effects of praise, but what Dweck is saying is praise effort rather than performance. Not yet. You haven't got there yet, right? Because what we want to do is improve a child's self-efficacy. You shouldn't really be comparing yourself to somebody else, although of course we do it all the time. And if we start doing something because we want a reward rather than doing it for our intrinsic motivations, and then you will stop doing those things if you don't get the reward anymore. Okay, so those are our evaluations of this, that it destroys your internal motivation, so it's negative to do with praise. If you've got low self-efficacy, it may lower your performance, so you get away from this stereotype threat. And then practical application, we can see how best to reward performances for people as we're going along, right? So remember Mark Lepper did a little study where children got a certificate for doing a good drawing, and then when they went back the next time, nobody wanted to do the drawings because they weren't going to get a certificate. All right, so then we went on to learning styles. So we talked about verbalizers, visualizers, kinesthetic learning. So people who prefer to hear things, see things, touch things, right? But remember, we talked about the fact that you've got to have all of those things combined, right? And you went into classes and you looked at, could you see children who were being avoidant? Children who were competitive or dependent, right? They didn't really like the new challenges. Did they participate well? Did they collaborate? Were they independent in their learning, right? Evaluation of learning styles is obviously that it does give a change from traditional methods, so that we start adapting things to individualization. However, there is no supporting evidence that people do better with a range of learning styles. And also the negative is that there are too many different identified. So remember we said there were up to 71 different learning styles that are identified, so it gets too difficult. So then you go into Willingham's theory of learning, okay, and Willingham says, no, forget it, right? It's not to do with different learning styles. They really don't exist, right? But he does say that we should use praise, but it should be sudden and unexpected. He says that we've got to use our memories and use cued responses so that our memory is better. That we should be self-regulating, and he also says, look, it's not scientific enough using learning styles, you should use neuroscience to help you to get to that point, right? So his theory is evidence-based because he's very scientific, it has real-world applications. However, his application of neuroscience isn't always accurate. Like I've said to you before, we know a lot more now about brain development than we did when I was at school, and obviously when Willingham was at school as well.